Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest webinar in our Management Matters series. Today's webinar will focus on effective communications to better engage lab professionals. I am Kaylee Thomas, the Events Manager for Lab Manager, and I will be your moderator today. We like our webinars to be very interactive, so we encourage you to send us your questions at any point during the webinar, and our speaker will address these during the Q&A session following the presentation. To ask a question, all you have to do is type your query into the question box on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. We will try to address as many questions as possible during the Q&A session. So let's get on with the reason you're all here. Bernard Tulsi is a communications specialist engaged with content development and dissemination. His current focus is on communicating how data are transformed into actionable evidence for the predictive modeling of real-world outcomes in industrial and healthcare settings. He held staff positions or long-term affiliations with medical, industry-based, and financial publications, including Lab Manager and The Scientist. Mr. Tulsi has served as adjunct assistant professor at Drexel University and Polytechnic Institute of NYU, teaching courses in technical and medical writing and international business. He holds an MS in specialized journalism from NYU Poly. Welcome, Bernard.
Oh, thank you, Kaylee. Thanks so much for that really nice and kind introduction. And thanks, everyone, for joining the webinar today. As we proceed, I hope that some overarching ideas will become apparent. The first of these is closely linked to Lab Manager's message about running your lab like a business. An important part of this presentation will focus on teams. And I will posit that if the goal is to improve business outcomes, this is the case for all of us, I'm sure that the interplay between communications and teamwork must be well integrated and fine-tuned. So teamwork and communications will emerge as two important topics in our conversation today. And at a time when labs and tech businesses, in fact, industrial and commercial enterprises in general, have never been more heavily focused on efficiency, there is a strong belief that sustainable value will only happen through unstinting and constant innovation, which rely heavily on attracting and retaining a talented workforce, a large proportion of whom today are early career professionals who we tend to loosely refer to as millennials. In their heavily connected and wired environment, millennials tend to see their employers, for the time being at least, as one of their main connections with Main Street, or mainstream society, if you like. And they're constantly assessing and evaluating a culture of their place of work beyond its immediate business objectives. This will become clearer as we get into the presentation. These younger workers want to work for organizations with purposes that surpass the bottom line. In essence, engaging in activities that will change the world for the better, to use the current catchphrase. So the final theme you'll notice is how to communicate with millennials so that they stay engaged and interested while helping to advance your business purposes and overall mission. Get the hang of this in one moment. So, as I mentioned a moment ago, Lab Manager magazine espouses the concept of operating a laboratory as a business. And here is a cover of the issue that explored the idea of building lab teams that pull together and sidestep the need to herd unwieldy cats. Now, I wouldn't attempt to explain unwieldy cats at this moment and face the risk of alienating all of you and drying up my interview subjects in the future. But the centrality of teams in business was developed at length in a recent book by Jack and Susie Welch. Jack Welch, as you know, was a long-standing chairman and CEO of GE, one of the most successful companies in the history of business. And in his own colloquial style, Jack Welch has written that no one should do business alone, that it's not a me thing, it's a we thing, that business is the ultimate team sport. Now, lest I leave you with the impression that teams have the solutions to all problems, let me quickly point out that teams don't always work well and that the results can be disastrous at times. Here are some of the reasons for team dysfunctionality, which I refer to as the perilous five. Very often in teams you have a lack of trust where people are not open. They don't want to show any vulnerability or, heaven forbid, admit any mistakes. Team members tend to avoid conflicts by sort of trying to gauge what the leader is thinking and follow the leader. They have veiled discussions where their true thoughts never emerge. And you might hear their initial real thinking outside of a meeting, kind of in what we call, back-talking, backstabbing a little bit. And in general, there is a tendency to have comments and discussion being very guarded and cautious. Sometimes in teams you have an absence of commitment where people, they don't really buy in, but they go along. They have been seconded to join a team. And they're there primarily to make up a certain quota. And they never see the team as me. They see it as them and they're part of the organization that, where they have to spend a portion of their day going through the motions of it. Then, in a number of cases, team members, do not take responsibility. They shirk accountability. And they may have a different agenda where whatever is happening in the team is not serving their purposes, and they put themselves above the team. And then, of course, one of the most perilous things is an indifference to the results, people not caring what happens at the end of the team tenure or for the part. They don't have a vested interest in the outcome. Now, on the other hand, teams have been known to work well and generate remarkable results. And many of you there might, on the statements I made earlier, might have been saying that, that has not been my experience. Many of you may, in fact, be members of teams that have worked well. And if that is the case, then there are a number of essential characteristics of such teams that are quite readily recognizable. They have what I call team spirit, driven by the knowledge that the information generated will be shared openly and their efforts will be justly rewarded. Things like conflicts are aired and addressed openly. It's a corollary of the previous things I mentioned, where members embrace accountability and there's an overall alignment with decisions, and everybody pulls together to generate the desired results. I need to point to an important caveat here, however, and that is that teams should never be organized rigidly. And this point has been developed in a book by Gillian Tett, one of the staff writers of the Financial Times newspaper. It's called the silo effect. And she makes the point that organizations have silos and teams tend to operate within their silos and do not integrate into the rest of the organization. Now, this is sometimes an absolute necessity. There are small groups that have to work in secret and deep dive into areas that no one else is working on, the most advanced cutting-edge technology. But organizations like Facebook, for instance, while they need those silos for sort of mind-bending, data crunching, big data projects and so on, at the same time, they organize things like, in the case of Facebook, they call it boot camp, and other collaborative exercises in which they squash teams together and make them, force them to have discussions, frankly, where they in essence, demolish those silos. Now, in a number of organizations, there are physical attempts to break down the silos. In a recent piece we did in Lab Manager on future labs, we took a look at physically facilitating communications using architectural and design approaches, creating collaborative workspaces and open spaces. Most of my time, or a lot of my time, I should say, I spend in an office that is totally glass. I hate it. Everybody sees me. I see them. They wave to me. The last time I was there, they were putting a kind of a chicken wire at eye level so that this doesn't happen all the time. But it's one of the drawbacks of the collaborative space. And, now, like Harvard Business Review and so on are coming out in research that are talking about the curse of collaboration, that it gets a little too much, but that's a subject for another day. But collaborative workspaces and sort of mixed discipline facilities have certainly created an environment in which different disciplines can share ideas and so on. That is something we'll come back to in a moment also. And organizations like Google, for instance, they create opportunities for collision among their workers so that you can have a kind of a cross-fertilization of ideas where people from different disciplines might make an offhanded comment that somebody else can use and could prove useful in the advancement of work that they're doing. Now, Tet further developed this point. And one very telling example she gave in her book on silos. There's a story of, and many of you may be familiar with this story, when in 1999, Sony launched two different, Sony was king of the Walkman, mobile music, walking around with your Walkman was in every young person's backpack. But in 1999, two different departments within the organization weren't able to collaborate and work together on a single best product. And the result was that at that time, Sony launched two different devices. Some analysts love the idea of two different devices. It's choice. The company, this is a master stroke for the company to have two of similar products at the same time. In the end, however, it turned out to be an unmitigated disaster because the two departments are competing against each other within the same company, and they were cannibalizing the products of each other and so on. It turned out, like I said, to be a mess. One of the biggest enemies, or a person who destroyed silos at every level within his organization, was the late Steve Jobs. And when he launched the online music store for the new iPod, changing audio history, that sealed the fate of the Sony Walkman, and they really dominated that organization. Steve Jobs, cut down any form of siloing at its knees. It's no wonder that, he's revered today as the tech grandmaster of our generation. And this brings us around to the key question of the leaders, the role of leaders. What is the purpose of a leader? Well, I hark back a little bit to Jack Welch's book, The Real Life MBA. In here he says that the leader sets the vision. He tells the team members, if we're going to stick to the team, I don't want to go on to like a company-wide discussion here, but within a team, the leader sets the vision. He says, here's where we're going. And he gives a rationale of why we're going there. He goes in depth on the strategies and tactics, how we're going to accomplish this. Then delineates the roles and duties of everyone, how each one of you fit in. And what's in it for each person. Here's how you will be rewarded. Now, you notice I have an arrow there that says communicate, communicate, communicate. And communication is the sort of a unifying force behind all of this. Leaders use communications to set the course and reset the efforts and thinking of the members of their team. And communication is not constant. It's something that changes and adjusts and gets molded depending on the need or the circumstance and the situation. Now, I come back to this point, however, that teams are not the best default answer. Anne Donnellan, in her book from Harvard Business School Press, points to a number of shortcomings. In spite of the best efforts of the people who created the teams, despite the best attempt to communicate, teams sometimes fall short of the mark. And in this book, it goes into a number of case studies in which teams did not really function as well as they should. This subject is explored a little bit further in an exclusive interview we did with Professor Alice Sapienza from the Simmons School of Management in Boston. And I'll go into the slide a little bit. Actually, this article, I think we have provided the URL for it in the resources. So if you haven't read it yet or haven't seen it, you can check there on the website later on. Professor Sapienza says that, sometimes we put a team in a place where a team doesn't belong. She notes that teams work best when the task is complex and uncertain, when it requires specialists to collaborate, specialists from different disciplines, and when they're cross-functional, and you need integrated knowledge and expertise from several people. She thinks it's hyperbole that teams are the most effective structure to do anything under all circumstances. And if you look around, many teams are mired in gridlock. They reach stalemates. There are places where, because of the team members not wishing to continue to speak with each other in some instances, they can't proceed. Now, we'll come back to this idea also. And the real question, she says, is how to get people to work well together. It doesn't matter what the structure is called. And the whole idea is to get my best work to support your work and broaden this across the entire team. So if I had to identify a single all-purpose instrument, kind of a lubricant, that will pull this whole making teams work together and work better, I'll have to say it's communications. So communications essentially entails an exchange of information in a way that conveys meaning. It helps people to share their knowledge and skills. And importantly, it helps to maintain motivation. So if you look at the figure there, it says communications is essential for helping solve problems, help with decision-making, manage conflicts, and manage boundaries for each team member. Now, at this stage, you may well be wondering, he's blabbing around about communications as though it's something tangible. Well, what is it really? It's the way I've presented it is it's a kind of a cure for all the ills that go around with teams. And George Bernard Shaw, who might have caused many of you nightmares in high school, early college literature, a wit, says that the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. So in spite of all of our best efforts, laying down the best communications framework and so on, how do we know that we are actually communicating? Is there a kind of a test? Now, in his book, Team of Teams, General Stanley McChrystal, who served in U.S. Military theaters in the Middle East and in Afghanistan and so on, and is widely regarded as one of the top military leaders, and now civilian and academia leaders. In his book, he says that you know when you're communicating because, in his case, he says, experience has taught me that nothing was heard until it was said several times. He stresses the need for repetition. How do you repeat or how do you reiterate your message? Well, he says rephrase, give information on different words, assess comprehension with questions and answers, use graphics to make your point, simple graphics, and follow up constantly, thinking about the needs of the audience. He cherishes feedback. And in his words, I'll read some of it. Only when I heard my own words echoed or paraphrased back to me by subordinates as essential truths did I know that they have been fully received. Now, many of us, me included, may want to take issue with the fully received part. I would rather say that when you hear people rephrasing what you said or using your concepts in their memos and in their ideas and so on, then you start to get the idea that you're getting through to them. So I will stop short of saying fully received. Here is a kind of a side-by-side, not comparison, but look at how McChrystal and Welsh approached this question of using communications. McChrystal says that communications should be used to persuade and convince team members. And part of that is to show that you value their trust and help to unleash their innovation. Demonstrate that they are not, that as leaders should demonstrate that they are not uninformed and unclear. And never say one thing and mean, or especially not do something else. And very importantly, don't promise what you can't deliver. In the case of Welsh, he says that leaders must employ good communications to be clear. I'll come back to the question of clarity in a moment. Consistent, clarify the mission and identify acceptable or required behaviors, and explain how the behavior of each team member will be measured and rewarded. And at this stage, I'm sure that many of you hard-driving managers may well be thinking, well, enough of this feel-good, bring everyone along, soft-touch approach. Are there any tangible benefits here? Are there measurable things? Well, the truth is, bad communications exact a high cost, as you can see in this figure, which is adapted from the Project Management Institute in a white paper called The Essential Role of Communications. What these guys estimated is that for every $1 billion in investment, $135 million is at risk. And of that $135 million that's at risk, $75 million is due to poor communications, or 7.5% of the overall amount. In other words, bad communications, inadequate communications, is responsible for 56% of the at-risk capital in any $1 billion in any investment. If you were to calculate it out for $1 billion, it comes out to $75 million. So here is a beginning of estimates that are showing that when you do not communicate well, beyond the soft, people getting grouchy and not wanting to participate anymore. There are real, dollar value losses, and we can start to see that being measured. This organization did it, and in other places as well. To be sure, poor communications can be comical, actually. So if you ever dabbled with journalism for a bit, somewhere along the line, one of your professors might have mentioned the power of the press, and it's reflected in statements such as, "Because we were unable to print our obituary section, there will be no deaths today." Here's an example from a college president writing to the academic vice president of his university. "Next Thursday, Halley's Comet will appear over this area. This is an event which occurs only once every 75 years. Call the division heads and have them assemble their professors and students on the athletic field and explain this phenomenon to them. If it rains, then cancel the observation and have the classes meet in the gym to see a film about a comet." Now, when the academic VP relayed this message to the division chairman, this is what went out. "By order of the president, next Thursday, Halley's Comet will appear over the athletic field. If it rains, cancel classes and report to the gym with your professors and students, where you will be shown a film, a phenomenal event which only occurs once every 75 years. And when this was disseminated to division chairmen and professors, this is how it went out. "By order of the phenomenal president, next Thursday, Halley's Comet will appear in the gym. In case of rain over the athletic field, the president will give another order, something which occurs every 75 years. If you want to get into this example in some detail and see others like it, of communication gone awry, you should probably take a look at John Maxwell's book, The 17 Indisputable Laws of Teamwork. What I'm going to try to do today is to give you the basic rudiments of an antidote to this problem. So the most important message I can leave it to you, or I can give you today, is that communications must be clear. Clarity is the essence of good communications. You have to explain and reiterate, as Stanley McChrystal, wrote in his book. So you have to be very aware of what you're communicating. And then when you do it, you have to be very clear, both verbally and in writing. You have to keep your ears wide open so that you know what team members hear and especially how they understand what they're hearing. Because, this is so crucial. It's really, really important. It determines what action will be taken and how what you're trying to convey will be executed. And it's very important. You must bear in mind at all times that misunderstandings lead to undesirable outcomes, to confusion, the wrong kind of action, frankly, and bad decisions. So it is really, really critical that team members communicate with fixed and the main goals in mind. It's important to bear in mind, too, that any kind of communication must understand what the purpose is. For instance, what do you want to do? You probably want to persuade people to do something, or you want to influence them to take a particular kind of action. And you need to be acutely cognizant of the fact that the things that enable you to do that would be consistency, some kind of command of the subject matter, which you can train yourself to do. You must be persistent. And have assertive and masterful arguments. I was getting a note there that I'm too far away from the microphone, so I will adjust my position. You might have seen, in all kinds of leadership and team discussions, the need for discussion, learning, and feedback in the team structure. I want to make two what I consider important points about this. The whole feedback, learning, discussion loop is very critical. It's really important. But unless leaders or the people responsible take action based on that information, then nothing will be accomplished. And failure to act, failure to take requisite action leads to, at the very minimum, cynicism and confusion, and of course, could result in failure. Now, while you may want to think that a lot of what I'm going to be talking about here is the responsibility of the leader, in many ways, each team member share these responsibilities as well. And it goes without saying that members should know who is the team and who is not. I find this a little amusing because I am on teams and I show up so infrequently. And this is not because I'm disconnected. It's because I'm required to show up infrequently for something in particular. And many people don't know whether I belong on the team or not. Each member must be conversant with their own responsibility, which goes without saying, and members should have a good grasp of the duties and roles that each other. In other words, if you don't understand what someone else is responsible for, then you may have no idea of what they may be able to contribute or help you with on a particular issue. And, when everybody's on the same page, so to speak, it creates a basis for support and reinforcement of the overall objectives of the team. Now, here are some key communication traits for team goals. It's really good when the leaders have what maybe you describe as a open door policy for communications and demonstrate that they're respectful to the views of all the other members of the team or the people who they interact with. It's also important to have a demonstrated open-mindedness and a willingness to consider different perspectives. I work sometimes at an organization, and whenever I go there, I interact a lot with the CEO. And the last time I was there, he dragged me into a meeting, but as we were walking to the meeting, he says that, I want to download for the next hour or so everything I gathered from various conferences and meetings and so on. And I had been at these download sessions before. He dumped data or information on the poor 10 or 12 people who are sitting there, and they don't get an opportunity to get a word out edgewise. And in fact, when they do get a chance to speak, they're so hurried and want to make a quick point that they stutter and stammer and things like that. And by and large, the next time they come, they just listen and say, okay, we'll absorb this and we'll move on. No opportunity to have a healthy exchange because he wants to download it. And then, of course, it's important to build rapport and empathy. Now, let's switch over now to some of the sort of practical ways to keep communications on track. I mentioned the need for maintaining an open door policy a moment ago. This facilitates effective information flow. It is important, and I said it earlier in this, that rigidity is not something that one should really encourage. But at the same time, it's really important to organize and streamline communication procedures so that at least people know what to expect. And it's really important to sort of develop and disseminate clear guidelines and checklists on who is responsible for what, how and what kind of information should be shared, and the frequency with which this is disseminated. So in as much as rigidity is eschewed, predictability is something that is really important. Now, teams that talk to each other generally achieve together. There's no need for me to go through all of these in any detail, because you're on a day-to-day basis, you're using all of these tools and ways of communicating. You'll notice towards the end there, I have a sort of a short list of the newer products. And these newer tools are considered essential for the tech-savvy millennial types, although, data is coming out that the baby boomers seem to be giving them a run for their money. But in planning your communications, and especially now that, we have multinational types of communication needs, or certainly wide swath regionally in the U.S., it's really important to master these various modes of communication so that you're able to reach and connect with the members of your team on a regular basis. That is not to say that FaceTime is to be relegated. In fact, some of the more successful team leaders take the time to get on a plane and then fly off to far-flung places to meet with and interact with their teams, spend time with them. That is invaluable and cannot ever be overemphasized. Now, in communicating with millennials, which is one of the themes of this webinar, it's essential to focus on the values-based aspects of your organization's culture. And you should never miss an opportunity to reiterate the higher societal goals and purposes that are served with the work of your labs, like keeping toxins out of drinking water, ensuring the food supply is safe and secure, and guarding against the ravages of pollution. And for those of you who work in clinical labs, the whole improvement of the health of the population, warding off against infectious type ravages and so on. So the key considerations, and particularly now that millennials are the dominant proportion of the workforce, you need to be mindful of how millennials in your team communicate. Especially now in multicultural societies and operations across the globe, there is an important and a great need to develop cultural competence. And I think I jumped the gun a little bit a few seconds ago and talked about the need for FaceTime. Let me just make the point again. In the age of globalization, international communications issues and FaceTime is really important. And it's business sociologists are documenting cases where the people who take the time, pharmaceutical company managers who take the time to visit their labs in other countries or their research divisions and so on in other countries, are reaping benefits. Now, in trying to sort of recap what we discussed here, we made the point that business is a team activity. The team structure, however, is not always the infallible response. And part of the reason for that is that teams can be functional and sometimes they don't work so well. We talked a little bit about how to manage, motivate, and inspire teams, and particularly, especially now that younger workers are coming in and their outlook on what their work life should be is slightly different from what might have been traditionally the case in organizations. And we talked about the need to maintain an honest, open information dissemination and communication process. I will say that essential communication skills must be sharpened and practiced constantly to facilitate all of this, any kind of achievement you hope to accomplish in these areas. I can't overemphasize the need for sharp written and verbal skills, public speaking skills, and a solid grasp of new media and social media. And the third bullet should have been at the end, and essentially to make the point that there's lots of places, lots of opportunities of training for webinars, free university courses, and so on, to help to develop all of those skills that I listed out there. And finally, to really wrap up, I want to go back to sort of the source that led to the Hoarding Cats article that started this whole thing in a way. And I credit a lot of that kind of thinking to Professor Vish Krishnan at UCSD Rady School of Business. Here's a statement that caused a fair amount of consternation when we published it. He says the challenge in a lab management setting is that we're dealing with a highly trained and knowledgeable workforce. So you can't use hierarchical management techniques. Labs are very much the prototypical example of a highly trained, high-ego workforce type. Management of such highly independent-minded workers is like the herding of cats. So I've been telling you all along that communications might be part of the answer. I would like to add his prescription for being able to deal with and answer this question a little bit more, and it includes the ability to be able to communicate really well with your team members and your organization as a whole. He puts training as a critical part of this. Know the tasks and functions that organizations values from you. That is the team member. Then develop effective metrics to measure the performance as well as the intangibles, things like cohesiveness and ability to work together. And then, as Jack Welch says in his book, lay out what the incentives will be. Let people understand what is in this for them. It's only through the effective, well-targeted use of incentives that you will be able to change people's behavior for the better. And encapsulating all of this, wrapped up in all of this, is the need to communicate, develop and hone sharp communication skills, and use it and do it constantly. And, well, I think I've reached the end of my presentation, but it's also the end of my allocated time, I believe. So, Kaylee, how do we proceed? Is there...
Yep, there's a few questions that have come in, Bernard. So we want to cover those. The first one is, does the leader come at all levels? For example, team leader, supervisor, director, etc.? How do you decide who the real leader is, I guess?
Yeah, well, it is interesting. This subject has never been settled. There are times when a board or a governing structure appoints a leader, and that person takes a kind of a top hierarchical position in the team and sort of sets the terms. And frankly, could be a little dictatorial at times. But like I said, it varies, and it's not settled, because sometimes you may have an administrative leader who runs the day-to-day operations of the team. Or you may have a technical leader who, whenever major technical disputes come up, will be the person who will, try to make a decision and split the vote. You may have a financial leader who is responsible for the parts. So you have leaders of various kinds. And you may even have a young, hotshot just out of graduate school who emerges as a leader because he has, tremendous expertise and knowledge, having worked on a particular area in depth for 5 years in graduate school or something. So it's hard to define a leader. But when once a leader is decided and accepted, then there are certain characteristics and traits and so on that, particularly the ability to communicate clearly, that the leader must exercise at all times.
All right, perfect. And the next question is, what are some examples of incentives? Are these tangible, emotional?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. For older fogies like me, it's usually dollars. The incentives usually are meaningless if it doesn't translate into money. In the millennial workforce, it's kind of different. If in surveys in millennials, they value things like being able to go into the recreation area at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and play a game of pool, or sit there while SAS is running or something and chat with their friends, or watch TV, and they value this. They also value things like a flexible work schedule, but they eschew the 9-to-5 approach. By the way, when I see youngsters playing in a pool room at 2:30 in the afternoon, my hair, I don't have much anymore, but my hair stands up straight on my head, because this is anathema to me. It's something that, but in today's environment, the quality of life issues, having lactating rooms in offices and so on, those kinds of things are very, very important. Having organic food brought in to the farm-grown organic food in the neighborhood, or sometimes in the compound of the lab or office, those things are very important, and people feel incentivized if those things are present in their organization. Of course, everyone is motivated by financial incentives, but in a lot of cases, when they talk to younger workers today, they stress the need for those lifestyle types of benefits as well.
Okay, the next email is about middle management. So do you have any recommended strategies for middle management to effectively communicate inconsistent, changing directives from upper management?
Yeah, well, that comical example I try to give with the school president and then how it gets translated. In some ways, it's instructive. It's really, really important to understand the mission or the purpose of any action that has been taken at a higher level. So when it gets done for middle management, then the middle manager understands precisely what it is that has to be done, what direction is being laid out. And the only way to really determine that is to ask a lot of questions, do a lot of follow-up with the people who are sending down the instructions to you, and make sure that you understand every aspect of this. and be able to anticipate questions that will come up and so on. Then when you master that and you know that process very well, try to think of your audience, the audience that you'll be communicating or getting this information to. Now, are these people who want a lot of graphics, charts, figures? Do they want 20 Excel? Are they motivated by numbers? If that is the case, then try to tailor your message in a way that feeds that. If it's a group that is not so keen on pouring through a lot of data and raw data, then you have to craft carefully written messages, develop webinar type sessions and so on that will simplify things and explain it in a way. If you're talking or you're dealing with a group that is mission driven, let them understand how what you're setting out to do will help to advance the objectives of that mission. If you're going to give them an unpalatable or a difficult message, find ways to soften it. Find ways to I was about to say conceal, but find ways to sort of situate the message in a broader message, so that they can, as they look at the unpalatable parts, they can comprehend and understand how it fits into their wider objective, and how at the end of the day, it is probably something that will benefit them as well.
Okay, perfect. The next question is, how do you show the importance of the teamwork to a person who does not believe in one but performs great individually?
Yeah, and not everyone is a team player, and not a team is not the answer in every situation, and not every person is a team player. The role of the leader is to try to understand the chemistry, so to speak, of each person. So for example, if you can broadly categorize people as introverts and extroverts, as one of my interviewee professor told me the other day, to broadly do that, then how do you have the introverts and extroverts on the same team? And it's amazing how they tend to look at each other. The introverts who do not speak out in meetings and who tend to hold they tend to look at the people who speak all the time and dominate the space as show-offs. Here they're coming here and they're taking over the entire hour. They're speaking all the time and they're showing their advanced training and things like that. And sometimes, by and large, many of us were in those situations. We may think that is correct, and it could very well be the case. But the thing that was very eye-opening for me was how the extroverts described the introverts. And they left the room and they said that, look at those guys. They're holding out on us. They know all this stuff. They have much more information than we do. They have a lot more answers. They look at their advanced training in this area, but they're not saying anything. What is happening here? Are they looking to get all the credit themselves? So different personality types have to be managed differently. If you and again sticking to those two broad categories, if you have introverts and extroverts on the same team, and again this is very generalized type of discussion, because people are not exclusively one or the other. It'll depend on the circumstance or the situation. But you have to find ways to get the people comfortable in their own skin and in an environment in which they can participate and contribute. So if that means having a smaller meeting with a few team members, letting the others understand that this is not exclusive treatment, but you believe that there's a particular question to be answered here, and these are probably the people who have the best past experience to deal with it, then you may be able to get a few of the people who are not so outspoken to come and share their ideas with you, and then you can sort of pass that on to the wider team. Good luck with trying to get the talkative people to calm down. That never really works.
Okay. The next question is, many people may often see written forms of communication such as email, as solely used for evidence purposes rather than a legitimate form of communication. Can you give some advice to convince them otherwise?
Yes, written forms of communication and email servers and so on have been in the news recently. In a number of cases, they have led to criminal charges and so on. So there is that. No, I will not entirely subscribe to that view. Pretty much anything can be used for multiple purposes. And emails are just another example of that. And the question, they're all, I read all the time in the business press that emails are going to be killed off by things like Slack and other programs and so on. And that could very well be the case, and the day might come when that happens. But in the meantime, emails are still probably one of the most widely used form of communication that we have. And if it's used inappropriately, or if it's used to give insider information, for instance, then that can lead to, be used in a criminal setting and lead to charges and so on. But by and large, most of us are able to use emails to get our message across to other people for legitimate business purposes, and it's worked really well. I know that there's a movement in some places, the pick up the phone movement, where people are saying, "Oh, don't overburden the emails. Pick up the phone and call somebody." Well, I remember the days when that was the case, where we would play phone tag with somebody for the entire week, and they'll call you, and you'll call them, and you're out, and you never get together. So when email came in, that was supposed to be a big answer to that problem of phone tagging and not being able to reach someone when you want to, in the sense that the email sits there, and I can, as is usually the case for many of us, we come at midnight and we glance through our emails quickly, and if there is an important one, we respond to it, or it might be an important bit of information coming into us. And now with mobile devices, we can do this from pretty much anywhere. Walking the dog, you can respond to an email. So I understand the sentiment that this can lead to putting you in a vulnerable position. But on the other hand, there is a lot of the greater good here is that you're able to get your message out, you're able to connect with people, and so on.
All right, perfect. Well, this brings us to the end of today's webinar. If we did not get to your question, please be assured I will forward any unanswered questions to Bernard, and he will get back to you via email. If you have follow-up questions that you didn't get a chance to ask, please consider reaching out to him. His email address is there on the screen. We would like to remind you that this is an ongoing educational webinar series. If you have any suggestions for this series, please do not hesitate to contact us. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. Thank you, and goodbye.
Thank you, Kate.